theme process is interesting. We spend the entire summer looking at where culture is.
In the summer of 2016, we started meeting together and praying and kind of discussing what are topics that we've heard.
And our whole goal for the following 2 weeks is to figure out what is our theme for the following summer, for this summer. And so what we did is we pulled all of the comments, all of the input from our youth pastors, and kind of narrowed it down to a few key things that students were dealing with. So what we do after that is after we figure out where it is we're headed spiritually in the concept, then we lock ourselves in a cabin up in the subdivision up here at Hume for 2 weeks.
And we lock ourselves in this cabin and we dive into God's word. We open it up and we read everything that we can about Saul through the word.
We chose King Saul because he's a guy who we see as somebody who struggles with his identity. He's anointed as king and yet has such a difficult time embracing his kingship, embracing who he is and who God made him to be.
But then once we feel like spiritually we're in exactly where we want to be every day, we begin to look at how are we going to tell the story?
We got a few things left on the board, 3 things or so, and it just is screaming at us that it has to be medieval.
We were like, we have to do medieval. We've always wanted to do medieval, and we're like trying to squeeze it to force it to make it work. And we always kind of came to the conclusion it's not the best way to tell the story. But this year, we knew it was the best way to tell the story.
And then we start our script writing.
We have an incredible crew behind the scenes that makes this happen. Our director, Josh, countless hours of poring over the script as he came into the process late in the game as being hired in Hume, December, January, coming on board and jumping into this thing just months before we actually set foot on film.
I was hired on January 1st, so that was 2 months before we started filming. So the script was already in working order. When I came in, Ben Akina, the writer, and I would just get on the phone and talk about story and character, and I think our collaboration together really refined the story and was able to really draw out the emotions that we wanted to portray. Ben Akina was actually the Philistine herald in the film.
Action. Cowards and weaklings of Illyria, you face an army that is superior in every way. If we met in battle, every last one of you would die.
Always loved to get Ben in the film.
One of the biggest hurdles for filming a medieval genre is 2 things for me. It was film locations. There's not really castles in California. And then there's the costuming, armor. A few years back, a guy named Jim Allen, he created what is called a vacuum form machine. And so basically what it does is it takes a sheet of plastic, heats it up, we lower it down onto a vacuum plate, and whatever mold is there, we suck out all the air and we get the mold.
So he actually started sculpting with clay all the different pieces.
So we're talking helmet, shoulders, chest plate, elbows, gauntlets, triceps, thighs, knees, shins, and those are double, some of them.
In the midst of him carving, it was in the winter, in December and in January, and we had a crazy winter where the basement where he was working was flooded. And so he is sitting on a bucket with his legs propped up on this thing, carving in 30-degree weather.
But look at my desk.
Oh.
This is my seat. This is my...
Keep your legs up in case you get electrocuted.
There we go. Just trying to stay out of electricity, but don't worry, I have a heater plugged in.
A heater in water. This has got to be some kind of violation.
And that was, to me, one of the hardest parts of this season was making everything originally. Once you have the plastic made, then we have to cut it out, sand down all the edges, put holes in it, strap it with rivets, Velcro, elastic. And then we also have to paint it all to make it look like metal. That was also interesting. But at the end of the day, we ended up making an army, and it was unbelievable that we could make armor. After we made all the armor, you then have to go into what is the cloth side of it. So we've got a sewing room with a lot of sewing machines, and then we have this amazing lady, Cheryl Chastain, who oversees all of our costume sewing fabrications. We made this year over, I want to say, I think 130 pieces, in a sense, between flags and gambesons and tabards and pants and capes and, I mean, so many different pieces of cloth that it took to make all that goes under the armor, you know? And so just the countless hours that Cheryl and the ladies have spent in that sewing room is unbelievable to me.
As I've mentioned, so many people that work very hard to make the costumes, the armor, the countless hours that Derek spent making the armor. And the king's armor was a one-off, just made for Kale. And so at one point, Rachel, who plays Selah, is messing around.
We got into this habit of that silly game of like a water bottle that you flip and it has to land perfectly.
Dude, you're not gonna get it on your first try.
I got it!
And so I was trying to do it. And every time I tried to do it, Jay Johnson would kick my water bottle.
And actually breaks my armor.
But it was really his fault. It wasn't my fault. So if you are going to aggravate me, you're going to get pushed.
Fine. Oh no! That is your fault! Don't tell Derek.
I don't know what the deal was. I think she struggles with her temper or something like that.
I'm going, baby. The toe life.
We made a bunch of different tents. I think we made 6 normal sized tents for the soldiers, and then of course we needed the king's tent. And so what we did is we ended up taking one of those parking awnings. We had 2 of them that we used for country fair. We took a bunch of pieces, mixed and matched them, and kind of made the skeleton, the shape, the bones of the king's tent. And then we draped fabric over it, and Cheryl and all the ladies sewed many, many yards together to make our tent look like a king's tent.
We actually built the tents on location and did all the exteriors there.
But the issue is then we needed our interiors.
The structure that was holding up the tents was on the inside of the tent, so we couldn't actually film that on location.
So what we did is we actually had to bring it back up to Hume Lake. In Meadow Ranch Chapel, it was all cleared out, all dark in there, which was great. We created our own lighting to mimic the sunlight from outdoors. And then we also then had to take our framework from the inside of the tent and make it bigger for the outside, so that way it had an exoskeleton holding the structure of the tent, so we never really see the poles that are holding it up. I was blown away when I saw it on film, and it looked like we went from outside to inside, and the outside was still shining bright like the sun, and it was awesome.
Keep your hands off me. Take your hands off me. I'm king.
So I mean, first of all, a pyre, not many people know what a pyre is. It's just basically like a structure of wood. And so what we did is we brought down a big truck full of wood. We've got plenty of that up here in Hume, so we trucked it all out.
Do your wipers work? Do your wipers work?
They work.
Okay,
Good.
Made a giant pile of firewood, put it up in a cool way. We set up our tents again, not as windy down in the gully this time, but still windy. The hope was that we would be able to set this on fire. Probably one of the biggest production days we've ever had, with so many extras. Oh yeah, and we had horses this day. And I love Jay, bless his soul, he had so much pressure on him this day.
The fire. Okay, so I'm sitting on this horse, and they're like, never take your hands off the reins. But here's what we want you to do, Jay. We want you to pull your sword out, finish the line of inspiring the Illyrian troops.
At the same time, grab a torch with his left hand and throw it to this pyre thing that's like 20 feet away.
And I'm right-handed, not left-handed. All the time, not taking both hands off of the reins. And once that fire goes, we're pretty sure your horse is gonna wanna charge with everybody running past you.
It probably took, I think it was 6 or 7 takes.
It took Jay, it must have taken him like 12 tries.
Who's with me?
It would bounce on and off onto the ground. It would completely miss. It was just the worst scenario. Was 40 people are sitting around watching each take, cheering each take, and then trying to get this thing to land perfectly. And when it would land perfectly, we didn't have enough gasoline on it. It didn't light up as fast as we wanted. So then we'd try a new take.
In my mind, I'm trying to remember the line, trying to do the sword. The sword was getting sticky, it's hot. Throwing the torch with my left hand.
Then there was a take where I ran in too soon and I had grabbed the torch and it was like, no, and then it lit and I ruined a take.
But we ended up getting the shot, and it looked great.
It was quite the scene, but definitely one of those days to remember for sure. What an epic, epic day.
Put it out. Put it out.
That's the one, folks.
This year we built a building here at camp, transported it over to the Central Coast.
Derek and I were trying to figure out what we wanted to do because we had to eventually burn down the orphanage.
We came up with the idea of building a set piece and burning it down.
We just built like a corner essentially. So behind it looks totally fake, but we just shot it in the right angle so that you could only see the 90 degrees that we actually built.
And what we did is we put it on location. We got it all set up and put a bunch of, in a sense, some napalm on it.
We're having a little fun with accelerants. We're putting a little petroleum jelly gasoline mix and a little, diesel gasoline mix and, some stuff and things.
Why?
And we're gonna burn down what we just built because that's, why not?
And then lit it, and we got to watch our creation be burnt to the ground.
I got what I need.
So another fun part, I don't know if fun is the right word because I care for people and I care for their safety and all that. And so Kale was often obsessed. He's angry. He's wanting to kill people. And we've got this awesome guy Cutter who is just there to keep us organized, do the first assistant director position, and we needed an extra for this one of the final scenes that we were shooting, and so I had to strangle Cutter it wasn't very many times. I think we were having problems with sound and lighting or camera, and I just had to keep strangling him.
They haven't found him.
You tell those useless wretches to stop wasting my time and find him!
Well, what we did to make an army, basically we only had like 20 extras. So what we did is we took those 20 people and put the tripod static, and then we would have those 20 people stand there for 10 seconds, and then we'd have them move just a little bit to the side, and then 10 seconds, and then a little bit to the side. So it was a long process, but it ended up looking like an army in the end. And if you look just closely enough, you see that there's a bunch of the same people, but from far away, you can't really tell. The fort as well. But what we did was we shot at Fort Logan, which is this fort that's in wagon train, and it's like a little kid's fort, basically, but we had to make it look like it was a big fort. So I took walls from different parts of the camp, and then we built out the wall to make it look like it's a big fort, and then just add some camera shake and posts, and it makes it look like it's a big fort. In the council chamber especially, but in a couple other scenes, we had to make it look like there were torches flickering. So the actual torchlight kind of flickered, but it wasn't enough light to actually shine on the actors' faces. So what we had to do is set up a light and have people fire dance basically in front of these lights. So there was a lot of funny moments where people were just dancing like this to make it look like there was fire on the people's faces. It looked great. Probably Matt Berg was probably the one who was the best fire dancer, but I guess it's arguable. For me, it's really hard to relate to a character like Superman because he's just so perfect and so indestructible and he can do anything. So with Kale, I feel like he's actually down to earth and he's more like us. He's more like me. He's more like you. He's someone we can relate to because we've made his mistakes. And sometimes, like, I wish I wouldn't relate to Kale and I wish I wouldn't relate to that stuff, but it's just life. We all make mistakes, and I think that's why Kale is such a good character to relate to.
I really hope that you enjoyed this film, but once again, it's just our take on God's Word. We want to communicate God's Word clearly, carefully, and creatively.
As I look at that last video, I find myself in it of saying, I don't want to find myself at the end of my life looking back and wishing I had chosen to be faithful. I want to choose that every day.
But the hope and the grace that we have is that we have redemption through Christ. And as we connect Christ to Saul, as we connect Christ to my life and a camper's life, is that they would actually walk away with hope to go, that's not the end. That yes, it was the end of Saul's life, but that's not the end of my life. Is my life going to be a tragedy? Is my life going to be, what a shame? But through Christ, I have redemption and I've got purpose. And that to me is what I want students to walk away with, is that they reflect on the power of what Jesus did on that cross for us.